A man was brutally stabbed in the middle of the forest. A couple was savagely murdered. A man was shot multiple times and then devoured by fish until only bones remained of his face. This served as a bloody warning. Each person was murdered in such cruel ways that the survivors could not believe their eyes. But this was only the beginning of the mysterious deaths. After the fateful plane crash, the survivors became prey one by one in a series of inescapable murders. The story begins. On a small plane flying from Guatemala to the United States, a passenger noticed something was wrong with the flight path. The flight attendant explained that the original route was experiencing severe stormy weather, so the captain had chosen an alternative route. Therefore, the journey would be extended by an hour. At first, the passengers didn't pay attention to this, until the plane suddenly shook strangely and they became worried. It turned out that the plane's GPS was malfunctioning. Fuel was running low. The captain wanted to call for help from air traffic control, but radio contact was lost. The captain seemed to have anticipated the outcome. He immediately lowered his altitude and used his cell phone to record his final words. When the propellers stopped spinning, the plane instantly turned into a mass of metal and plummeted to the ground at high speed. Fortunately, the crash site wasn't too high. After the plane crashed, the cabin was relatively intact, except for the flight attendant who wasn't wearing her seatbelt. Most passengers only suffered minor injuries. A man wearing glasses named Kevin glanced around and realized the flight attendant had a broken spine and couldn't be saved. A black man named Zach offered to check on the captain. They broke open the cabin door and discovered a wooden plank had pierced his chest. Luckily, his breathing was still relatively stable. Kevin pulled out the plank and was about to help when suddenly a burning smell filled the cabin. It turned out the engine had caught fire. A man named Carlos immediately jumped out of the cabin, but it wasn't to put out the fire, but to retrieve his luggage. Luckily, the fire wasn't large. It was quickly extinguished. However, everyone was curious about what was in the luggage that was so important that Carlos almost lost his life. Not long after, the unconscious captain was carried out of the cabin. His lungs had been punctured, and his health was in critical condition. Unfortunately, there was no signal here, so they couldn't contact the outside world. The middle-aged couple, Lisa and Travis, were optimistic and thought the rescue team would arrive soon. While talking, they kept looking ahead at Carlos's suitcase. The fact that they were still in the mood for chatting showed they hadn't realized the imminent danger. Dan and his wife, Amy, inadvertently saw something moving in the forest. Now everyone was confused. They didn't even know where they were. A woman named Sonia, who had traveled extensively for many years, speculated that this was probably a tropical rainforest in Mexico. At least 600 kilometers in radius, it was all mountains and forests. Furthermore, the plane's navigation system was malfunctioning, so the rescue team couldn't arrive anytime soon. Just when everyone was in utter panic, Zach stood up and encouraged everyone, saying that if they stayed united, they would overcome it. The most important thing now was to get to know each other better. He introduced himself as Zach, an investigator from an insurance company. People like him usually have keen observational skills. When the plane crashed, he was the first to check on the captain, because the captain was the one most likely to help everyone escape. Previously, he had investigated a case of arson to defraud insurance companies, which had harmed his own family. This long trip was somewhat like a getaway. He even suspected the plane crash was caused by a wealthy enemy, but because there was no evidence, his speculation was dismissed. Next, the man wearing glasses introduced himself as Kevin, a former surgeon. That's why he knew at first glance that the flight attendant couldn't be saved. He's currently in the medical equipment business. This trip was originally to import goods from the US. The woman Sonja travels year-round, but when asked about her profession and past, she became angry and refused to answer. The man who risked his life to retrieve the luggage was Carlos, a professional wrestler who highly values his honor. This trip was to participate in a tournament. The rest were a young couple, Amy and Dan, on their honeymoon. The middle-aged couple, Lisa and Travis, were unremarkable. They were just running a business back home. Travis suffered from heart disease and had to take his medication on time to stay alive. Including the severely injured and comatose captain, a total of 9 people survived. Zach exuded leadership qualities. He began assigning the next tasks. The remaining supplies on the plane absolutely had to be collected. The amount of fresh water in the tank was enough to last for 3 days. Seeing the flight attendant's body gradually stiffen, Zach thought it was best to carry it out of the cabin. Leaving it there any longer would certainly attract insects. He and Kevin chose a low-lying area to place the body. It was the best place to put the trash. At that moment, someone ran up to report that the captain had regained consciousness. Zach was incredibly excited. He had so many questions he wanted to ask the captain, but the captain's lungs were severely punctured. Even after half a day, he couldn't utter a complete sentence. At that moment, Zach thought of Kevin, who used to be a doctor. Couldn't he treat the illness? Kevin shook his head and refused. The captain's condition required surgery, but he hadn't had any surgeries in years. This place was in a remote mountainous area and lacked the necessary facilities for surgery. Even the most basic scalpels and antiseptics were unavailable. Despite Kevin's pessimistic outlook, everyone had to put aside the idea of treating the captain. Lisa used the available food on the plane to prepare a simple lunch for everyone. After eating and drinking, everyone recovered a little and felt more confident. Sonia guessed that there might be a signal on the mountaintop. Carlos said that if they didn't have enough food, they could go hunting in the mountains. There was plenty of water in the forest. Simple filtration would suffice. Even though they couldn't contact rescue immediately, everyone felt optimistic about their upcoming survival. Only the captain was still occasionally coughing, slightly affecting the atmosphere. Everyone looked towards the only doctor, Kevin. Finally, he decided to give it a try. Under his guidance, everyone split up to find surgical instruments. The first aid kit contained ointment, antiseptic, and bandages. Sonia found high-proof alcohol in the cabin, along with a few bottles of water. Travis pulled out the most important item, a scalpel. Once everything was prepared, Kevin used the alcohol to disinfect the wound. He said the wound was basically fine, but the captain needed to overcome the shock of the surgery. The current environment carried a high risk of infection. Things were gradually improving. Only Dan and Amy, still worried about the situation inside the cabin, feared what might happen if they encountered wild animals. When would the rescue team arrive? Suddenly, the sky outside the window darkened. A light flashed across the forest. This time Amy saw it clearly. Could there be someone else in the forest? Lisa and Travis were sitting outside. They still suspected Carlos, especially of the suitcase he treasured. While he was in the restroom, Lisa tried to see what was inside, but when she got closer, she discovered the suitcase had a combination lock. In an instant, night fell. Several survivors fell asleep. Only Dan remained vigilant, looking out the window. Carlos was still secretly practicing. At that moment, a mysterious figure silently approached, picked up a jacket, and covered the captain's head with it. The next morning, everyone woke up to find the captain's body, dead with his eyes wide open. Kevin was utterly distraught. The captain's wound wasn't infected and wasn't bleeding, so why did he die? The only explanation was post-surgical shock. Everyone regretted it. They should have sent someone to be with him last night. Another day passed, another body. Amy wanted to bury him and the flight attendant, but most people thought it was inappropriate. Waiting for the rescue team to arrive and handing the bodies over to their relatives was better. They were still too naive and thought they could be saved. They didn't know the Grim Reaper was slowly approaching. After the captain's death, Kevin was filled with remorse. Seeing the weather getting hotter, they had to dispose of the body quickly. While Kevin and Zach were moving the body, they didn't notice a phone fall from the captain's pocket. Dan quietly picked it up. Seeing Amy's questioning look, he explained it was the captain's only memento. Maybe they could return it to his family later. Then Dan said he needed to use the restroom. He quickly slipped into the bushes. At this moment, Zach and Kevin carried the captain's body to the pit. The female crew member's body, which had been dead for 2 days, was beginning to decompose. Kevin wanted to bury both bodies to prevent the spread of disease, but Zach suggested they wait. If the rescue team arrived, they could exhume the bodies and take them away. Looking at the captain's stiffening body, Kevin sighed. He had quit his job to go into business because years ago, he had prescribed medication for a little girl, causing her to develop an allergy. Her condition worsened, her parents sued him, and his wife and children left him. Seeing Kevin's despair, Zach quickly comforted him, saying it wasn't time to give up. The urgent matter was finding a way to escape. Just as the two left, Dan secretly approached the pit and used a knife to cut off the captain's finger. It turned out Dan wanted to use the captain's fingerprint to unlock his phone. After a while, Dan discovered an application that required a password to access. Meanwhile, Lisa and Travis were whispering to each other. She told him that she suspected the captain hadn't died from complications after surgery, but had been murdered. Previously, at the hospital, she had encountered a patient who had died of suffocation. The corpse was blackened and its eyes were red. He said it was impossible. She argued that there were many reasons, and that the scarcity of food and water alone was enough to drive people to slaughter each other. Just as they were talking, a noise came from the bushes behind them. Lisa suspected someone was spying on them, so she immediately stopped the conversation. At this moment, Sanja sought out Amy privately. She noticed that Amy didn't seem to be on her honeymoon. Amy, in tears, recounted everything. It turned out their love story was quite dramatic. She was a wealthy young lady, while Dan was merely her family's driver. They had developed feelings for each other over time. They secretly registered their marriage, hiding it from their families and eloping. After hearing this, Sanja didn't know how to advise her. She simply went back to tidy up the luggage in the cabin. Travis saw a long trunk and hastily claimed it was his. Carlos accidentally found a GPS tracker in the wreckage of the plane. After checking it, he discovered that the device was still working. If they could place the locator at the highest point, they could transmit information to others outside. Everyone's fading confidence was instantly restored, especially when they heard that Carlos's father was a power line repairman. Carlos could use the existing wires to create a power line, but transporting the transmitter to the mountaintop would take at least half a day, so he decided to rest there for the night, and then everyone would set off early the next morning. Lisa announced that they only had 11 bottles of water left and their food was running low. Now the most important task was to find supplies. Carlos told everyone to go into the forest to explore after lunch, but they didn't know that from this moment on, strange things would start happening. First, Amy saw someone hiding in the bushes while she was resting. When she looked closely, she saw nothing. Travis's situation was even stranger. The heart medication he had in his suitcase suddenly disappeared. Now he only had a few pills left. Lisa was sure he'd misremembered, so she decided to go around looking for them. Sonia was checking supplies on the plane when she also noticed something strange. She found that the distilled water in the cabinet was half empty. Carlos said someone must have selfishly hidden it. To prevent another theft, Carlos used an electrical wire to lock the cabinet door. After spending more than a day together, Sonja felt that Zach was honest and trustworthy. He was definitely the ideal husband she was looking for, so she took the initiative to open up to him. Her true identity was a reporter. She flew all over the country to report on and expose the crimes of major criminal organizations. After resting for a while, everyone started looking for food and water. While walking along a small path, they discovered some blue mushrooms. Sonja realized these were extremely poisonous mushrooms. They only grew in damp places. This indicated there was a water source not far away. Sure enough, not long after, Dan found a pool nearby. He took off his shoes, preparing to bathe. Carlos immediately stopped him. This pool might be the exit of an underwater cave. To verify his fears, Carlos threw Dan's shoe into the pool. Immediately, the shoe was pulled underwater by some creature. Those on the shore were terrified, breaking out in a cold sweat. Sonia guessed that the pool might contain some kind of predatory fish. Just then, everyone heard gunshots in the forest. They rushed to investigate. It turned out Travis was hunting. His luggage, retrieved from the plane earlier, contained a hunting rifle. Lisa, having run a guest house for many years, knew how to protect herself. After the captain was killed and Travis's medication was stolen, Lisa and he decided to use weapons to demonstrate their strength, and he certainly didn't disappoint. In a short time, he caught several monkeys. Sonia took some water from the lake and put it in a container. She used a fire to heat it, creating steam. Finally, Sonia solved the problem of drinking water for everyone. Lisa was in charge of cooking. She used monkey meat mixed with tomato sauce to prepare dinner for everyone. Travis ate with great relish, but Amy found it unappetizing. To avoid wasting food, Travis ate his portion and even Amy's. Zach was curious about what Carlos always carried in his suitcase. Carlos secretly prayed that the suitcase didn't contain dangerous weapons so that everyone could be safe. Finally, he decided to open the suitcase. Unexpectedly, it contained a very ordinary mask, but to him, that mask was extremely important because it symbolized his identity. In the gladiatorial arena, losing the mask meant losing one's life. At night, everyone fell asleep except for Travis, who occasionally groaned. He felt uneasy, but he didn't notice someone searching for something on the plane. The shadowy figure found a satellite phone in the woods. After he replied to a message, a similar phone in the luxurious villa rang. The person on the other end was a woman with a very serious expression. Early the next morning, Carlos was awakened by shouts. Lisa found Travis vomiting violently. Kevin rushed over, suspecting Travis had food poisoning. Coincidentally, there were several packets of nausea-inducing medication in the airplane's glove compartment. Amy rushed in to get them, but the compartment was locked with a wire, so she couldn't open it. Travis's condition was worsening. His heart condition relapsed, and he stopped breathing. At this point, Lisa couldn't bear it any longer. She believed someone had killed her husband. The poison used by the killer was the same poisonous mushroom they had seen the day before. Moreover, the motive for the murder was very clear. Because supplies were limited, the fewer survivors, the higher the killer's chances of survival. To increase credibility, Lisa revealed the truth. The captain had been murdered, not killed by after effects, as Kevin had claimed. Kevin was about to explain when Lisa suddenly remembered the earlier scene. She and her husband were discussing the cause of the captain's death when the killer overheard them. That's why he killed Travis. Everyone present felt terrified. If what Lisa said was true, then the killer must be one of them. Sanja sadly returned to the plane. She deeply regretted locking the supply locker. Carlos broke open the locker door. He looked at the emetics inside and comforted her, telling her not to blame herself. Travis had a heart condition, so even if he took the medication in time, he might not survive. At this moment, Carlos remembered that Travis had eaten Amy's meal. Could the killer's real target be Amy, not Travis? Meanwhile, Dan proactively took the captain's phone and gave it to Amy. Before the plane crash, the captain recorded some last words for his wife. The captain spoke Spanish, and coincidentally, Carlos also knew Spanish. He immediately acted as an interpreter for everyone. The captain told his wife that he couldn't go on living anymore. Even if he was lucky enough to survive the crash, someone wouldn't let him live. He also reminded his wife to be careful to survive. After listening to this recording, everyone could confirm Lisa's suspicions were correct. The deaths of the captain and Travis were not accidental, but deliberate acts. The killer was one of them. Amy kindly comforted Lisa, telling her not to grieve too much over her husband's death because it was an unfortunate accident. Lisa mocked Amy for being too naive. Lisa was certain Travis had been killed. Moreover, the killer was hiding in the camp. Lisa began her analysis. Zach liked to lie. Kevin killed the captain. Carlos was quiet and reserved but very cunning. Sonia didn't want to talk about her past, but she recognized the poisonous mushrooms. Even Dan wasn't a good person. After all, a rich girl falling in love with a poor boy would never have a good ending. Amy stubbornly said that Dan loved her deeply. Lisa laughed mockingly, saying she knew nothing about love. The kind-hearted Amy was angered, but Lisa's words were like a nail piercing deep into her heart. She went into the forest and saw the dark figure again. This time she saw clearly that it was a man wearing a hood. As she turned around, she saw her husband. Dan was very curious to know what she had told Lisa. She hesitated for a moment. Finally, she decided to lie to hide her suspicions. Meanwhile, Carlos had finished designing the antenna for the GPS device. Next, all they needed to do was take it to the highest point so that those outside could receive their distress signal. But when choosing who would go up the mountain, a fierce argument broke out. Because of the continuous deaths in recent days, no one wanted to leave the camp alone. Zach decided he would stay behind to guard the camp, while Carlos, Kevin, and Sanja would handle the task of installing the tracking device. The three of them could protect each other. No matter who the culprit was, they wouldn't dare act recklessly. Carlos, out of habit, put a piece of chewing gum in his mouth and then threw the wrapper on the ground. This caught Sanja's attention. Earlier, when she was guarding the supplies on the plane, she noticed that half of the food in the refrigerator was missing. The missing food included this type of chewing gum. There was no doubt that Carlos was the one who stole the supplies that day. But Sanja decided not to argue on the way. As they passed a steep cliff, Sanja was afraid Carlos might cause trouble, so she proactively offered to help him carry the signal transmitting device. Everyone climbed mountain after mountain under the blazing sun. As they neared the highest point, she slipped and nearly fell into the abyss. Luckily, Kevin managed to grab her hand, but the signal transmitter was stuck on a rock ledge. Sanja knew this was the only thing that could help them escape, so she mustered her courage and reached out to pull the transmitter. Carlos and Kevin formed a makeshift ladder and used their strength to pull Sanja up. After this experience, their confidence had increased significantly. If anyone had tampered with the device earlier, they wouldn't have been able to retrieve the transmitter. Finally, they reached the summit. Unfortunately, there was still no phone signal. They could only place all their hope on Carlos's signal transmitter. After securing the device with an antenna, it finally lit up. He told everyone that the device was transmitting a signal and that the rescue team would soon arrive. As dusk approached, everyone decided to return to the camp to await rescue. At the foot of the mountain, Zach went alone to see Lisa. She remained very wary and warned him not to come closer than 2 meters. His attitude was clear. He begged her to put aside her prejudice against him. In this situation, everyone had to unite. Of course, she understood this principle, so she revealed to him a piece of news. Amy had said that besides those in the camp, there was someone else secretly monitoring them. Meanwhile, Dan was still asking Amy what Lisa had said to her earlier. She didn't answer. She suddenly remembered Dan saying he was publishing a book, but she hadn't seen him write a single word for so long. He then asked her if she suspected him. She obediently told him Lisa's suspicions. After hearing it, Dan became angry. He couldn't believe she would trust an outsider instead of him. She suddenly felt a terrible headache, so she asked him to go into the plane to get medicine. From their conversation, it's clear that Amy still uses medication regularly. While Dan was away, Amy curiously opened his wallet. She saw many different business cards inside. These were the kinds of things scammers often possess. Her heart ached terribly. terribly. She didn't make a fuss, but she kept speculating about what might have happened. She felt Dan had become completely unfamiliar. He wasn't pretending anymore. His words and actions were no different from those of a scoundrel. He ran into the plane. Despite Zach's pleas, he took out the bottle of disinfectant and drank it freely. Amy couldn't take it anymore. She ran to a secluded place and cried silently. Suddenly, the hooded man reappeared, but when Amy turned around, he disappeared. Just then, Dan ran to find Amy. She hurriedly told him what she had just seen. The man had been following her since the plane crash, but Dan didn't believe her. He was sure she was hallucinating. His words angered her. She took the stack of business cards from her bag and demanded an explanation from him. He didn't know what to say. His explanations to her were nothing more than excuses. At the same time, Sonja, Carlos, and Kevin had also returned to the camp. Everyone was excited after learning that the signal transmitter could be used. After Lisa finished preparing the barbecue, Kevin went to Dan and Amy. He found them still arguing. He told them to eat first and then settle their differences. Night had fallen, and the rescue team certainly wouldn't be coming. It seemed everyone would have to stay here for another night. As everyone gradually fell asleep, Dan suddenly opened his eyes. Carlos went to the secluded spot to train as usual. During a break between training sessions, he opened a video recording of his previous match. His mind drifted back to the crowded arena. He's usually quiet and reserved, but as soon as he puts on his fighting mask, he instantly transforms into a war god in the hearts of his fans. He's like two completely different people in the ring compared to offstage. The louder the audience cheers, the more frenzied he becomes. But his opponent in this match weighed 10 kilograms more than him. As expected, he was knocked to the ground unconscious. His phone ran out of battery, so he stopped watching the video. Then he took out a chocolate bar he'd stolen. This was essential to replenish his depleted energy. To defeat his opponent and avenge his previous loss, he was capable of doing anything wicked. After completing his second training session, he noticed a man in black standing behind him. This man was also wearing his fighting mask. Suddenly, he felt a chill in his stomach, as if he had just been defeated by his previous opponent. He fell to the ground unconscious again, only this time, he couldn't wake up. Early the next morning, Carlos was nowhere to be found. They searched the area but couldn't find any trace of him. Lisa was certain he had been harmed. Hearing this, everyone immediately felt terrified. Just as Zach suggested expanding the search area, Kevin suddenly spoke up, reminding everyone that there was something more important than finding him. Why hadn't the rescue team arrived yet? But they didn't know that someone had cut the antenna wire of the signal transmitter they had installed on the mountaintop. They descended the mountain and split into two groups. One group searched everywhere for Carlos. Only Zach remained in the same spot, not searching. He remembered Amy's warning that someone was monitoring their every move. He suspected something very important was hidden in the plane. He and Sonja searched everywhere in the plane, but found nothing suspicious. They still couldn't figure out the killer's motive. Not long after, the search party returned. They hadn't found Carlos. The rescue team still hadn't arrived. Kevin guessed that the signal device might be malfunctioning. He then went with Sonja to the mountaintop to check. The rest of the group split up to find a cool spot to take a nap. Zach suddenly opened his eyes. He went deeper into the forest. He didn't know that everything he did was being watched by Lisa. Amy, who was sound asleep, was awakened by the sound of someone. Gathering her courage, she picked up a burning branch and slowly walked towards the source of the sound. Soon she saw the hooded man. She knew he was about to shoot her. Without hesitation, she plunged the branch into the hooded man's chest. But then she realized the person she had stabbed was Dan. At this moment, Kevin and Sonja reached the middle of the mountainside. They stopped to drink water and saw a large flock of crows flying not far away. Sonja and Kevin immediately changed course. They went straight into the forest. Arriving at a place where crows were flying, they discovered Carlos's body. They brought the bad news back and coincidentally overheard Amy stabbing Dan, making her the most suspicious person. After bandaging Dan's wounds, they tried their best to protect Amy from the accusations. As a child, she had experienced a terrorist attack. A hooded man shot and killed her teacher in front of her. Since then, she has suffered from depression and frequently uses medication to calm herself. These explanations, however, couldn't disprove her guilt. People even considered her to have violent tendencies. If the deaths of David and the pilot could be considered accidental, then Carlos, covered in wounds, was certainly murdered. Sonja wondered who the killer was, if not Amy. But at this moment, Zach's main concern was the killer's motive. What he didn't know was that there was a large quantity of drugs hidden in the top deck of the plane. It turned out the plane was full of contraband. Someone, wanting to seize all the drugs, was determined to kill everyone alive. Amy suspected the culprit wasn't among them. This was plausible, but if the culprit was someone in the camp, then Dan was the most suspicious. It was possible he knew the plane was carrying drugs from the start, or perhaps he accidentally discovered the drugs later, but judging by the others' behavior, they were also somewhat suspicious. For now, only the straightforward Lisa and the naive Amy couldn't possibly be the culprit. Zach warned Sonya to be wary of Kevin. Sonya told Zach that Kevin had also told her to be wary of him. Clearly, there was no longer trust between them. Kevin was also investigating Dan. While bandaging Dan's wounds, Kevin had inadvertently noticed the tattoo on his shoulder. Curious, Kevin asked why Dan had this tattoo. He explained that he got the tattoo when he joined the gang. Kevin's face immediately showed contempt. He had treated criminals with prior convictions. He recognized that the tattoo had been forcibly applied. Dan became enraged and lunged at Kevin, fighting him. Everyone heard the commotion and rushed to stop them. Although Kevin's face was bruised, he still didn't reveal Dan's secret. At this point, Lisa announced bad news. The ammunition she kept in the box had been stolen. Now, only one bullet remained in the gun. She believed someone wanted them to starve to death. To prove his innocence, Dan recounted his past imprisonment for fraud. The tattoo was done during that time. He explained that he had previously pursued Amy because she was wealthy, but now he was completely in love with her. Everyone stood silently, speechless. They couldn't believe the lies of a con artist like him. At that moment, Lisa was secretly doing something in the woods. Sonya suddenly appeared and asked Lisa what she was doing. She was wary of everyone, but she found Sonya to be the most trustworthy. So Lisa told Sonya about her discovery. Last night before Carlos's accident, Zach had gone into the woods alone. He stood there for a long time. Lisa was very perceptive. She believed Zach was just lying. He definitely had something to hide from everyone. As night approached, the weather worsened. Everyone huddled in the airplane cabin. The cramped space made them uncomfortable. While everyone was complaining about water falling, Sonya noticed someone had tampered with the ceiling. Zach had an idea. He had suspected something was hidden inside the plane. After he pried open the ceiling, a bag of white powder fell out. Dan was certain it was drugs. Zach calculated the value of the goods to be $3 million. Sonya suspected that the airline was just a front. In reality, they were using passenger transport services to traffic contraband. The airline feared they would discover the truth, so they deliberately murdered everyone. While everyone was excitedly discussing the situation, no one noticed Amy's panicked expression. She saw the man in the hat again. When everyone looked back, they realized Amy had disappeared. Dan was extremely worried and ran outside to look for her. Kevin also wanted to follow, believing it was dangerous for Dan to be out alone at this time. So they decided to search for Amy together. It was raining heavily and thunder was deafening. Amy followed the man in the hat. When he noticed someone approaching, the man pulled out a knife. At that moment, Lisa appeared with a gun. Lisa told Amy to go back and call for help. Lisa threatened the man to drop the knife. Suddenly, lightning struck, and the man instantly vanished. Immediately afterward, he reappeared behind Lisa. She tried to remove the man's mask, but she gradually lost strength and stood still. She died inexplicably. People stood around her body, blaming each other. They wondered if they should just sit and wait for the killer to come and murder them one by one. Zach urged everyone to unite, because some people are capable of anything for drugs. Sonya nodded in agreement. She proactively recounted her past. Years ago, she was an addict. It wasn't until her boyfriend died from excessive drug use that she realized the terrifying power of drugs. This trip, she was determined to leave that place of suffering, but she wouldn't forgive the drug dealers. She knew their identities. After saying this, she took out several bullets from her pocket. These were bullets she had found in a secret location. Then she pointed the gun at Zach. It turned out that near dawn, she had followed Lisa's instructions. She had gone to the place Zach used to sneak to. Yesterday, the rain had washed away the bullets buried underground. She found what Zach wanted to hide. Besides the bullets and a gun, there was also a satellite phone. He knew he couldn't hide it any longer. He immediately said he was an inspector from the Drug Enforcement Agency. This operation was a covert investigation into drug trafficking by the airline company. Seeing that no one believed him, he let Sonya check his wallet. Inside were his documents, but Kevin searched his wallet and found no documents as he claimed. This time, he had nothing left to prove his innocence. He knew someone had stolen his documents. The reason he stole Lisa's bullets was to be prepared for any eventuality, because he knew the culprit was someone who was here. He definitely couldn't leave the gun outside. Kevin couldn't tell the difference between real and fake. He remembered he still had the satellite phone, They could use it to contact the outside world and quickly leave. Sanja had tried before, but she didn't have the phone's password. Everyone looked at Zach. He shook his head helplessly. This phone wasn't his. Someone must be trying to frame him. Dan, enraged, attacked Zach with a gun. This time, the two sides didn't look at each other. Kevin quickly intervened, saying that even if they killed Zach, they wouldn't know the password to unlock the phone. Luckily, they still had some bullets to bring back. Amy volunteered to take on the task. She used to go hunting in the park, so let her go find food. Sonia wondered what they should do with the phone, so she went alone to find Zach, who was tied to a tree. He seemed agitated. Their relationship used to be quite close. Last night, before Lisa died, Kevin's behavior was very strange. Besides Dan being the first to escape the plane, Kevin could also have killed Lisa. Now Zach was tied up, so Sanja might be in danger. She shook her head in denial. She believed Zach was the culprit. Otherwise, why would he have deceived everyone from the beginning? Now she just wanted to know the password to unlock the satellite phone. He said it wasn't his phone. She could only sigh and leave. But Dan wasn't so easygoing. He wanted to torture Zach, but no one wanted to do such a cruel thing. Dan suggested drawing lots. In the end, Kevin drew the task of forcing the password out of Zach. Sanja wasn't going to sit still either. She had to go to the mountaintop to check the signal transmitter. Amy decided to go with Dan. Now the number of survivors was dwindling. If they didn't stick together, they would all meet a tragic end. In their eyes, Zach was the culprit. In fact, Kevin thought the same, but as a doctor, he couldn't bear to hurt anyone. As long as Zach revealed the password, Kevin assured him no one could do anything to him. But Zach still insisted the phone wasn't his. Kevin lost his temper and punched Zach repeatedly. But from beginning to end, Zach still didn't reveal the password. Kevin's expression changed. He took a pair of surgical scissors from his pocket. Kevin tried to ask, but Zach didn't answer. Kevin pulled out Zach's toenail. His agonizing scream echoed throughout the valley. By this time, Sanja and the others had climbed to the mountaintop. She realized someone had unplugged the power cord. After she plugged it back in, the signal transmitter started working again. At the same time, at the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, a senior manager handed out an urgent note. They had received a location signal from the crashed plane. It proved there were still survivors. However, the signal was coming from deep in the Mexican jungle. Moreover, the signal was an old-fashioned simulated signal. A distance of 12 to 25 nautical miles was a major challenge for search and rescue operations. But this wasn't the most important thing. The Federal Aviation Administration had reviewed the flight crew's records of the crashed plane, and most of the passengers had a history of drug use. Investigators went to the airline company. It turns out, this airline company is fake. It's actually a business. This company had never been involved in the airline business before. Considering the lower-than-market ticket prices, the investigators believe this airline company is involved in shady dealings. They're pretending to sell airline tickets, but are actually dealing drugs. The company manager doesn't seem to care. He said that if they have any proof, they should talk to him. But the plane crashed in Mexico. The aviation authority knows that the government will prohibit any country from investigating this matter. From the brief conversation, it can be inferred that this female investigator is likely Zach's wife, because she said he was from the anti-drug agency. It seems what he said was true. In the jungle, Zach is tied to a tree. After regaining consciousness, he sees a figure with a knife approaching him. He looks closely and recognizes it as Sanja. However, he was certain she hadn't come to kill him. She was also very conflicted at this moment. She asked him what proof he had that he wasn't the culprit. He thought for a moment and said that if he were the culprit, he could have used a gun to kill everyone on the night the plane crashed. He was very eloquent. He analyzed the current situation very clearly. Only 5 people remained alive. The newlywed couple, Dan and Amy, were definitely part of a group. If he died, she would be isolated. Finally, she was convinced. She used a dagger to cut the ropes binding him. She did this simply because she didn't want to see him suffer anymore. Early the next morning, Sanja pretended not to know anything. Kevin told everyone that Zach had escaped. At this point, everyone was terrified. Even if he wasn't the culprit, the torture they inflicted on him the previous day would surely provoke revenge, especially considering that the person who let him go was still among them. The small group, already suspicious of each other, immediately fell apart. So Dan told Sanja and Kevin to stay away. Sanja urged everyone to stick together, saying their chances of survival would be higher. Dan said that Carlos and Lisa had done the same thing before, and they had all died mysteriously. Sanja sighed silently. Next, she could only cooperate with Kevin, but he pulled out the rope that had once tied Zach up. The cut on it was very clean, clearly made by someone with a dagger. This person could only be Sanja. At this moment, she was completely alone. The only consolation was that she still had Zach's gun for self-defense. Zach was also alone. He didn't dare return to the area near the plane, so he could only find a suitable place to hide in the forest. He looked up at the sky. The towering trees made him sense that something bad was about to happen. Meanwhile, Dan and Amy were waiting for rescue in the camp. Earlier, they and Sonia had fixed the GPS device. By this time, the rescue team should have arrived. Amy's words devastated Dan. She said that if she could, she wanted to go home and find her father immediately. Clearly, she didn't want to run away with him anymore. Not far from the forest was a military base in Mexico. The person in charge received a notification from the Civil Aviation Authority. They had received the GPS signal of the missing plane in the rainforest. After confirming the approximate location and marking it, they immediately dispatched the base's only helicopter for rescue. Due to the short distance, the helicopter quickly reached the rainforest. However, the trees were so dense that searching for survivors was extremely difficult. The sunlight shone through the foliage, making a few drops of blood particularly noticeable. Dan was telling Amy about his past. He had started acting when he was very young. When he first met her, he only wanted to use her to make money, but things spiraled out of control because he discovered he had fallen deeply in love with her. Faced with such a sincere declaration of love, she showed absolutely no reaction. Suddenly, countless crows flew out from the valley. Sonja, Kevin, and Zach simultaneously realized something was wrong. This scene was all too familiar to them. Every time the crows appeared, someone among them was sure to die. The three of them ran back to the camp together. Sonja was the first to arrive, but she only managed to see Dan one last time. The newlywed couple had died so suddenly. Zach was truly terrified at this moment. Sonja believed he was responsible. Soon after, Kevin also rushed to the scene. He immediately picked up Dan's gun. Kevin thought Sonja and Zach had conspired to kill Dan and Amy. Meanwhile, the helicopter arrived at the crash site, but it was completely covered by trees. So the pilot looked around but couldn't see anyone. The three survivors were still suspicious of each other. Sonia tried to explain. She said that if she and Zach were accomplices, she wouldn't have confessed to his theft. Zach insisted that Kevin was definitely the culprit. Kevin, of course, had to defend himself. He said that if he were the culprit, he wouldn't have rescued Sonja from the mountaintop. All three were potential suspects, and they could also find evidence to prove their innocence. Just as they were arguing incessantly, the sound of a helicopter echoed from above. The three immediately realized that rescue had arrived, but the area was densely forested and even foggy, so the rescue helicopter couldn't detect their presence. Sonia and the others stood there looking at each other. Only when the sound completely disappeared did they realize they had missed their chance to be rescued. Zach suggested using the smoke from the campfire as a signal. Now wasn't the time to argue. Sonja was still a little worried, so she suggested Kevin put down his weapon. Kevin was forced to take out his only bullet and throw the gun into a puddle. Sonja, with her wilderness survival experience, suggested they go to higher ground to use young leaves to make smoke. But Kevin didn't want to go with them because he still suspected Sonja and Zach were accomplices. He felt he could be in danger at any moment. Even when faced with Sonja's gun threat, Kevin still refused to go with the two of them. Kevin only reminded Zach to remember to go down to meet him when rescue arrived. Sonja had no choice but to lead Zach to higher ground alone. But because Kevin had pulled out Zach's toenails, he had a hard time walking the mountain path. Every now and then he had to sit down to rest. At this time, she confided in him about the days they had survived together in the jungle. She realized she had unintentionally fallen in love with him. His expression changed, and he stopped himself in time. He said that he was married and had a lovely child. Sonia looked confused and quickly changed the subject. She thought Kevin was definitely the culprit. Perhaps he was somewhere watching them. At that moment, gunshots rang out from the distant canyon, startling both of them. Kevin had thrown away his only gun, so who was the shooter now? Zach decided to go down and investigate. This was their best chance to identify the culprit. The two quickly returned to the canyon and finally found Kevin's body in a puddle of water. He had been shot in the back, and his head was submerged in the water, being devoured by fish. When they pulled his body out, Sonja and Zach recoiled in shock. His face was nothing but white bones, a horrifying sight. Now only Zach and Sonja were survivors. Clearly, someone else had killed Kevin. Sonja suddenly realized that perhaps everything Amy had said was true. The strange man she saw in the woods wasn't a hallucination caused by a neurological problem. Zach suddenly felt terrified. The killer had probably been hiding in the cargo hold since the plane took off. Otherwise, he couldn't have committed murder on the very first day of the crash. Seeing that it was getting dark, they decided to rest for the night in the plane. and figure things out later. Zach searched for metal plates to barricade the door. Although this wouldn't completely prevent the killer from breaking in, it could at least give them a heads up. The two of them drifted off to sleep. A dark figure picked up the satellite phone and called the person in charge of the airline whose plane had crashed. This person was definitely a spy on the plane. By the 9th day, only 2 of the passengers and crew remained alive. Zach and Sonia set off early. They had to light a signal flare before the rescue helicopter arrived. However, the weather was unfavorable. Today is another day of thick fog, especially at the high mountain peaks, where everything is shrouded in dense mist. The 2 men searched the tracking device and found the indicator light was still on. Zach felt much more relieved. Yesterday, the rescue helicopter returned empty-handed, so they would surely conduct a new search today. Sonia acted as if nothing had happened and began to proactively ask about Zach's family situation. Unexpectedly, his wife, Claire, was also a police officer from the investigation department. She had previously been ordered to Mexico to investigate the cause of the plane crash. However, due to strong obstruction from the local authorities, Claire had ultimately failed and returned. She recalled Zach before he left. At that time, she had been very worried about his trip. He had assured her that he would definitely return safely to reunite with his family in 5 days. But now, a week had passed, and he still hadn't returned. So Claire decided to go to Mexico herself. Although she knew the hope of rescue was slim, she still had to do something for her husband. But she was still thinking too simply. As soon as she arrived at the Mexican border, she caught the attention of a police officer. He guessed she was there to investigate the plane crash and insisted she stay at the hotel. The officer wouldn't let her go anywhere until his superior changed his mind. Meanwhile, in the rainforest, the sun grew increasingly intense, and the fog on the mountaintop was rapidly dissipating. Suddenly, the sound of a lion echoed from not far away. Sanja looked terrified. Zach explained that it was probably just an animal passing by. After saying this, he took off his sock. The wound on his toe hadn't healed yet. She told him to clean it. She had to find a nearby branch so they could start a fire when the fog cleared. He was worried and wanted to go with her, but his toe hurt too much. She reassured him, telling him to rest assured she would absolutely not leave within 5 meters. However, not long after, he heard the sound of shoes crunching on rubble. Because of the fog, he could only hear sounds but couldn't see anyone. The next moment, Sonia was knocked unconscious with a wooden stick. The man picked up the gun from the ground and turned to face Zach. Still wearing Carlos's mask, this guy pointed the gun at him. He recoiled. When he was nearly falling down the mountain, he said that from the beginning, they were all innocent people who had no intention of harming him. So why did the man want to kill everyone? The man didn't say a word, but fired a shot, sending Zach tumbling into the ravine. Then he turned around and found Sanja awake. She desperately wanted to know who this man was. He slowly removed his mask. She was utterly astonished, but the next moment, he shot her dead. Early the next morning, the Mexican army sent helicopters to the area to search. At first, they found nothing. Until, flying over the highest peak, a soldier suddenly spotted a signal transmitter. After circling the mountain range and conducting a thorough search, they finally found the plane wreckage deep in the canyon. The search team immediately reported to their superiors, and half an hour later, the first rescue team arrived at the mountaintop. They quickly found a small path leading down the mountain and easily accessed the wreckage. Although the plane was severely damaged, the rescue team could still detect traces of life. The rescue team fanned out to search for survivors. The cabin hatch, which had been flung open, quickly caught the attention of a soldier, but the drugs that had been hidden inside had soon disappeared. Not long after, they found an open area where the bodies lay. 9 bodies lay neatly on the ground, the stench so strong it was horrifying. Even so, they had to pack the bodies to take them back to base. The team leader concluded that there must be at least one survivor nearby, so he ordered his subordinates to continue searching the area. Elsewhere, Claire was stranded at the Mexican border. Finally, she received official confirmation from her superiors. She was still not allowed to go to the Mexican jungle to search for clues about the plane crash. She could only go to the military base in the jungle to wait for news. 9 bodies had been found there, but their identities were still unknown, so the military had contacted a forensic expert to determine personal information and the cause of death. Without hesitation, she immediately prepared to leave. On the edge of the rainforest, at a temporary military base, the 9 bodies of the plane crash victims had been packed and brought back. They were all placed in a prepared storage facility, awaiting the forensic expert's arrival for examination. Earlier, an lieutenant had received a mission from his superiors to try to investigate the cause of the plane crash, but this was not their main job. So everyone just went about their work, and what they didn't notice was that the person in charge of the airline where the plane crashed was monitoring every move in the base through binoculars. Soon after, the forensic team was called in by the military. Cora used the tactic of asking for directions to stop the forensic team. Seeing that the team was completely unsuspecting, Cora drew her gun. At the same time, in the morgue of the military base, a dagger suddenly emerged from a body bag. Immediately afterward, a figure emerged. It turned out that one of the 9 corpses was a fake. That person slowly walked to the mirror, revealing the face of Dr. Kevin. He showed no joy at having escaped, but hurried towards the other corpses. By this time, Cora, the person in charge of the airline, had arrived inside the military base. She lied, claiming to be the forensic team called in by the military, and easily deceived the guards. Facing the military officers, Cora appeared extremely calm. She clearly stated that she did not want to be disturbed while working. But for security reasons, the officer in charge still sent an extra soldier to accompany Cora. When the two opened the door and entered the morgue, they discovered that all the bodies had been disemboweled. While the accompanying soldier was still in shock, Kevin suddenly appeared and knocked him unconscious. Seeing Kevin, Cora was overjoyed and emotional. It turned out they had known each other before and had collaborated on this case. She urged him to leave quickly, but he told her to wait a moment. It turned out that he had secretly transferred all the drugs from the plane into the stomachs of the corpses beforehand. Unfortunately, Claire had also arrived at the military base at this time. She clearly stated her intentions to the officer in charge. She wanted to go to the morgue to investigate. Whether Zach was alive or dead, she had to see it with her own eyes. Sadly, she was a step too late. At this point, Kevin had already removed all the drugs from the corpses. Kevin and Cora poured gasoline everywhere. When a match was thrown, a fierce fire quickly erupted in the morgue. This way, no one would know who these corpses were, and they certainly wouldn't be able to confirm if anyone was still alive. Claire was rushing towards the morgue when suddenly a loud explosion erupted ahead. Seeing the flames, all the soldiers fell into chaos. Cora and Kevin seized the opportunity to drive out. The soldiers were too busy putting out the fire to pay attention. They could only leave the vehicle behind and drive away. The soldiers remaining in the rainforest were still trying to find survivors. After a while, apart from a strange mask, they hadn't found any useful clues. As the soldiers were preparing to report their findings, one of them suddenly spotted a blinding light in the forest. Unexpectedly, Zach had been hit by 2 bullets and fallen down a cliff, but miraculously, he survived thanks to the cushioning of a large tree. He only fell to the ground unconscious for one night. When he regained consciousness, he was surprised to hear the sound of a helicopter. An idea struck him. He took off his sunglasses and used the reflection of the sun to attract the attention of the rescue team. Claire was still worried at the base. Suddenly, the person in charge received a report from the rescue team that they had found Zach alive and he was now receiving emergency treatment at a city hospital. Claire breathed a sigh of relief. She immediately went to the hospital where he was. 2 bullets hadn't hit any vital organs. The most serious injury was a fractured femur from the fall. It was undeniable that Zach's survival was a miracle. At this point, he was certain that the masked man was Kevin, because the police had collected the passenger list and found that no one named Kevin was on it. Clearly, he had used a fake identity. Zach also revealed crucial information to the police. The airline where the plane crashed had been secretly dealing in illegal substances. Even without knowing Kevin's true identity, arresting the company's manager was certainly the right thing to do. And that was exactly as Zach predicted. Kevin was currently discussing matters with Cora, the company's manager. The drugs had already been transported out of the forest, and all the witnesses were dead. He believed he had done a perfect job and that the police wouldn't find any loopholes in the airline's plan. But he never imagined that Zach would survive. Zach had told the police that all his crimes began with killing the captain. It was simply a covert killing, because the captain was also involved in the drug trafficking. Kevin was terrified the captain would reveal the secret in a critical situation. Furthermore, Kevin had destroyed the signal transmitter that Carlos had repaired. If the rescue team had arrived sooner, the drugs hidden in the cabin wouldn't have been so easily transported out. To minimize the chances of being discovered with the drugs, he successively killed Travis, Carlos, and then Lisa. Even Amy and Dan didn't escape. Kevin, of course, was the one using the satellite phone. He not only successfully framed Zach as the prime suspect, but he was also able to contact Cora at all times. Otherwise, their subsequent escape plan wouldn't have been so well coordinated. He was extremely pleased about this. He secretly stole Travis's heart medication. The medication contained a significant amount of receptor inhibitors that could slow heart rate and lower blood pressure. Before the rescue team arrived, he ingested a large amount, almost causing him to fall into a state of apparent death. Combined with the stench of the other corpses, he was able to successfully feign death. After killing Amy and Dan, only 3 survivors remained. At that point, Kevin naturally became the prime suspect. To dispel Zach's suspicion, he intentionally dressed Dan's body in his own clothes. Then, he pushed Dan's head into a puddle of water. Before that, he had thrown a bullet to create a surprise effect. Then he used fire to ignite the explosives. Zach and Sonia, who were climbing the mountain, mistook the body for someone shooting. They ran to find the victim wearing Kevin's clothes. Sonia naturally assumed he had been killed. She wanted to get closer to confirm, but saw that the corpse's face had been gnawed to pieces by fish, so she gave up. Zach admired Kevin's cunning, especially when he heard his wife say that the corpses in the morgue had all been disemboweled. He immediately guessed that the bodies contained drugs. This was another reason Kevin wanted to kill everyone. If he didn't, he wouldn't be able to transport the shipment under the military's watchful eyes. At this point, he was in high spirits and went to the pilot's house to instruct him to transfer the drugs onto the plane. When Kevin returned to Cora's residence, she said she wasn't feeling well. He then smiled and admitted that he had added some poisonous mushrooms from the forest to her breakfast. He did this because the captain of the flight had sent her a very intimate video. Even a blind person could tell that the two of them were having a secret affair. Unexpectedly, the most tragic person was the captain himself. Kevin, of course, wouldn't forgive Cora for betraying him. After cruelly poisoning her, he immediately boarded a small plane intending to escape. Just then, Zach arrived with the police. Seeing Zach alive, Kevin was extremely surprised. He used all his strength to make the plane take off. Zach didn't give up and fired his gun into the air. Unfortunately, he still let Kevin escape. At this moment, Kevin looked triumphantly at the drugs beside him, thinking about how to spend the money he had earned. Suddenly, the plane's control panel sounded a warning. It turned out that Zach had accidentally shot through the fuel tank. At this moment, the plane is flying over the area where the previous accident occurred. Perhaps another tragedy on the plane is about to happen. That's all for today's video. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you in the next videos.